record on this computer. And welcome to the MWA New York chapter March meeting for 2023. I've been having a little computer trouble lately, so if suddenly I die, just stay in place and I'll try to come back on and reset things up. Today, for the second time in a week, I had everything shut down suddenly, and I realized I hadn't changed a lot of what I'd written this morning, and I had to reconstruct probably half a page when I got it back up. Fortunately, the autosave spared me some of it. Hey, Jeff. So let me see, who are our people tonight? And of course, I have that on my computer screen, but not on my computer screen because I have all you on my computer screen. Teal?
It's me and Flaherty, Greg Flaherty, who is not here.
Oh, no, Phil Chafari had to.
And Phil, yeah.
No, there was one other person. Let's see. I'm going to go away from you for a second to pull up. You cannot minimize while you're in the meeting.
Gary, J.G. Faraday was the other person.
Oh,
he
JG.
was on here just a minute ago.
Yes.
Greg is his first name. He was here a moment ago. He might have just popped off.
Okay, JG. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Teal, let's start with you. And if you want to introduce yourself to the group, because some may know you, some may not, you can talk about your work and anything else you wish to.
Okay. Well, hello. I'm Teal James Glenn. Used to be known as TJ, but since I've got my stuff in print, I've branded fully with the whole name, which is difficult for people to write correctly because they misspell me. Greetings, Greg. Fellow horror guy. I have a background as a stuntman and actor, fight choreographer. I did 60 Renaissance fairs. I got myself beat up by Hawk on Spencer for Hire. And one of the proudest moments ever is when Robert Parker signed my copy of a hardcover book of his. He wrote Hawk was lucky. If you thought Avery Brooks was impressive on screen as Hawk, he was far more impressive in person. He was the most intimidatingly cool guy I've ever met. He showed up on set in Boston, and I thought, oh, there's Hawk in costume. And he went into a trailer and then came out in his Hawk clothes. So he was cool before he was cool. I'm also, I was trained as a book illustrator. I write in almost every genre. My book, Cowboy in Carpathia, won Best Novel from the Pulp Factory 2 years ago. And the sequel, A Cowboy and a Conqueror, is up for the Pulp Factory Award. Yes, you can all vote for Best Novel this year. I've written straight up murder mysteries. This particular one, which is now out of print, but hopefully we'll get in print soon, is Murder Most Fair, about a fight choreographer at a Renaissance fair whose best friend is murdered, and he finds the body and solves the murder. It's 75% really happened. I was the fight choreographer. I did find my friend, and no, we never actually solved it, but in this world, he got his justice. I have the Maxie Moxie series, which is a husband and wife team in Hollywood in the 1930s who always seem to get involved in very strange mysteries, and almost always Nazis, but you know, that happens. And I have the John Shadows series, here we go, which is about a modern day ninja / private investigator whose mother was an assassin for the Japanese government during World War II. And Mama still hangs around and annoys him and everyone else. I mean, that's sort of my background. I got hit by things and fell off stuff and got set on fire, and then went and had pizza. And I taught stage sort. I was one of the people I studied under was Errol Flynn's last stunt double, Patty Crean. Only for a 3-week seminar, but I got to kind of, that's my 6 degrees of separation from Errol, who was my inspiration. And if it's bladed, I've studied it. Although I've also taken tactical weapons courses and pistol certifications and whatnot, and been blown up a number of times for stunt purposes only. So that's me. I pretty much, like I said, I write pretty much everything but math textbooks, because to me, those are horror.
Okay. That sounds pretty impressive. That's quite a resume. JG, I'm looking
Hi.
on my screen and these things keep moving around. So
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me here today. This is actually the first meeting I'm attending because normally I'm not anywhere near a computer or microphone at this time. So it's kind of nice to meet you all. A little bit about me. I've been writing dark fiction since 2002. And probably, although I'm considered more of a horror and science fiction writer than anything, I've definitely dipped my toes in the mystery pool on more than one occasion. I discovered early on in my writing career that I really like to blend or mix genres. Several of my short stories and novels have incorporated key aspects of common mystery styles. The Unwilling Detective, stories from me would be like Bones or Rough Justice. Noir Private Eye type. I had a story that was out called Slutty Dead Girl about a detective pairing up with a ghost who's out for murder. And police procedurals. My latest novel is Ragman, and it's about a mummy loose in New York City, and two detectives are trying to solve what they think are locked room mysteries. They don't realize that the mummy can appear and disappear into those rooms. So it's sort of, a definite mix of the two styles there. I've also experimented with various tropes, science fiction Rear Window type mashup that I did a short story about, and a novel about several teenagers trying to solve an ages-old sort of supernatural mystery, sort of like a Scooby-Doo cartoon, only the ghosts are real. And speaking of Scooby-Doo, I do like to say that watching those old cartoons was a huge part of my childhood, along with reading Edgar Allan Poe and the Hardy Boys at a very young age. And that got me started with my love of mysteries, thrillers, horror, all of that kind of stuff. I think because everything I was reading was a mashup of those things, even though they didn't call it that back then. As far as my own background, I've been a technical writer and a laboratory manager, and now I own a resume writing company. The only thing close to crime that I was ever personally involved in, without giving too much away, professionally, is that for a while I worked as a crime scene photographer.
Ooh, cool.
If there was body parts on a track, on the railroad track, I got to take pictures of them.
glad I haven't eaten yet.
Yeah.
Okay, well, gentlemen, the idea behind Spotlight was for you to engage each other a little bit and talk about maybe your first works, inspirations, some experience that mattered, perhaps approaching publishers, finding agents. This is basically your hour. So I'm going to let you go, and I'll jump in on occasion, ask a question or something like that, but this is on you. So we're blazing a trail here. Let's try
But
not to get burned.
JG, it's interesting. I got to write a mummy story for a collection called Restless, but they wanted other than Egyptian mummies. So I got to write one about a Mongolian mummy in which turns out to be Genghis Khan's mummy, because they still haven't found his tomb. And it was just fascinating once I started to do the research for the book, how many civilizations mummified their dead.
Yes.
I mean, it seems to be almost a universal trope. Any civilization that reached sort of modern Bronze Age level seemed to decide we got to wrap up the old folk. So, but in various ways too. The Egyptians were the most elaborate, but everybody seemed to do it. It was the thing.
Yeah, I mean, everything, all the different civilizations in South America and Latin America did it. And and I don't know if a lot of people know this, even a lot of our Native Americans in the Southwest did it, put them up in those caves, the little ancestral caves.
Well, the other thing I found fascinating is that the Victorian obsession with Egypt, they used to have mummy tea parties where they would make tea out of the mummies that they brought back from Egypt and sit around in cannibalistic fashion, drinking tea made, yes, exactly. Oh, hello, Mr. Frothingham. Oh, look, I've just drunk a spleen. And I just thought that is the absolute height of civilization, where you are so convinced your society is better than everyone else that the other society is reduced to being a food source.
Just another example of why they didn't live long back then.
Yes, well, they didn't mummify. That's why. See, how they mummified. Exactly what would be a resume writing company? I think that's a fascinating idea. I know whenever I put a resume together, I'm always asking 3 or 4 friends and blah, blah, blah. That's pretty amazing because it really is about creative writing mostly.
Well, back when, and I'm going to kind of date myself here, but back in the mid 90s, late 90s, when I was doing laboratory work, there was a lot of bouncing around, just like with IT today. Companies closing and opening and moving and trying to get ahead in your job. And I got tired of writing my own resume. So when a company that I was working for moved, I said, you know what? I've got a good severance package. I'm going to take a few months and start a home business. My first job was actually proofreading for the Princeton Review. And while I was doing that, I came across an ad for resume writers. And I said, I've written my own 100 times. I can do this. I got the job. And 3 months later, I took the certification program. And I've been running my own company for 20 years now.
Wow. I mean, I had resumes, but all my careers were bizarre careers. I mean, I had a stage fight choreographer resume, stunt coordinator resume for film, an actor resume, but all of those are really kind of loosey-goosey. None of them would stand up to corporate scrutiny,
Right. That's why we stay in business.
So you have the company, you don't guarantee anybody gets the job, you just will write the resume. I see, there you go.
Well, actually, and you know what, that's 100% true. I do not guarantee anybody a job because you could blow the interview.
Oh God, yes.
You'll get more interviews with my resume. That's it.
Well, these days you could blow the interview because 3 months ago you wore a silly hat on YouTube. Yes. And called somebody a jerk.
Yeah, in 1987, you told a bad joke.
Yes. Which is pretty much all of my jokes. I see you've got a bunch of axes on the wall behind you there. Are you a rock player?
I am I'm a player. I'm definitely a rock player, but I would not say anywhere close to even an amateur player. I play for fun. I haven't been in a band since high school, but I collect them, I sell them, I build them and I sell them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Building guitars is just, that's about as niche as you could get.
This is what I just did this summer.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Wow. I had 3 guitar lessons in high school, and the guy looked at me and went, no. No. Because I always wanted to be Roy Rogers. I wanted to be able at the Ren Fair, because there's always one guy at the Ren Fair sitting around the campfire who would end the night playing guitar, and the last song of the night was always Happy Trails at every single Ren Fair in 5 different states. That is your last song around the campfire at the Ren Fair. But I always wanted to be that guy, because that guy never went to his tent alone.
If you ever go up to, there's a writers convention up in Providence, Rhode Island each summer. It's called NECON, NECON. It's Northeast Writers Con. And the first night, there's always a play along, sing along. So there's about 9 or 10 guitar players, a couple of people on tambourine, and a bunch of people singing, and they play for about 8 hours in the outdoor quad area, just song after song after song.
Has it ever successfully called up an elder god?
You know what? We have a saying, what happens at Nikon stays at Nikon. So no comment.
Teal, I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, 2 questions. First, the mummy question, and I'll put it to both of you, since you've both done mummy research. Was everybody mummified in ancient Egypt, or just the big shots?
It was definitely the big shots, and I believe it was also people that had money.
Yeah, it was the big shots and the upper middle class. You know, because it did require you to hire somebody to do the process. So most people were like, we're okay, we're dead, it doesn't matter. It was mostly people, I think, who felt guilty that they needed to have a little extra edge getting into the afterlife. And so they would pay to be done well.
There's a mystery story in that, if you look at funerary customs as such things go. I was a professor, and I was at a popular culture conference many years ago, and I attended a presentation on American funeral customs and how they were essentially generated by the Civil War, which I found very interesting. And because everybody does something different for funerary customs, and I did write a short story once based on, there's an area in India where the dead are left to the vultures, and I did a story in a fictitious made-up land where that happened, a mystery story many years ago. And that's fine. Final question for me, Teal, and I'll tip it back to both of you. Can you say hello to Donald Pleasance for me? I see you have his volcano lair in the background.
Well, you know, it's a B&B, you know, so
I was looking and thinking, wait, that looks familiar. Oh, I know that. You only live twice.
And the thing is, it's a model, and they blew up a model, and those are little toy figures that are in the model when they blow it up. Because even on the big screen, I'm sitting there as a kid looking at it, and when it goes up, all little figures just go gunk. No, nobody moves arms or legs. It's because they had a large scale miniature, but they just put in like toy figures that just fell over. So, you know.
Okay. Well, let me ask among the members, any questions for our spotlit gentlemen this evening?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet.
Are
Just
you going
today. Next time.
I have a question. What do you guys think about Sherlock Holmes mysteries compared to other types of mystery things, like more current ones?
Well, I've written a couple of Sherlock Holmes that for Sherlock Holmes Mystery Magazine, and then a bunch of pastiches that ran in Mystery Weekly, which is now just Mystery. They're very formula. But I have an occult investigator called Dr. Argent, who is contemporary of Holmes and has Lestrade wander through some of the stories. So Holmes is always somewhere in the distance. Like, why don't you turn this over to him? Well, this is more your kind of case, sir. But they're formula. So when you have the formula, it's relatively easy, you know, and because we're far enough ahead of it, we really don't have to worry about any technology, you know, getting the technology wrong, because we've got the benefit of hindsight. Guys like Chris Abbott has written, like, I don't know, 30 or 40 Holmes novellas, and Will Murray's done the same. I did a couple of Holmes, and that kind of satisfied my desire to write Holmes specific. I did write one Dr. Watson story because I find Watson more interesting than Holmes.
For me, I think that Sherlock Holmes is one of those things where it's almost ageless or timeless, because those books, those stories combined a lot of different aspects. There was a little bit of science fiction in there. There was, obviously the mystery, but there was also something about them that kind of had a very broad audience compared to what some of the others might like. I think you're going to find more people enamored with the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, maybe not the original books themselves, but just the whole idea of it, more than some of your other sleuths or detectives back then. And I think that's why now, especially with him going to public domain, you're going to see a lot of Sherlock Holmes books coming out. And I would not be surprised if some more of those movies came out too, even if they don't have Robert Downey Jr. But the nice thing is they lend themselves to modern times, whereas, maybe something like Agatha Christie wouldn't, in that same respect, transfer so well to the 2020s like we have now.
Yeah, I agree.
There are hands going up and there are questions in the chat. So Hal, let's go to you. Your hand was up a couple times.
Thanks. How did you guys cope with the impact of the pandemic on the publishing industry? There was basically a blockage and everything got backed up. And the parallel question is, if you have an agent, how did your agent cope? Was your agent able to get your stuff into the pipeline and have the publishers returned to some sense of normality?
Well, for me, I don't have an agent, so that wasn't something I needed to sadly worry about. Would have been nice. As far as writing, I've always been the kind of writer that I don't pitch a book. I don't sign a contract. I don't do anything like that until the book is at least half written, if not completely written. So I write and then sell instead of sell and then write, only because I don't like that pressure of deadlines on me. So during the pandemic, I came out on schedule. I pitched my book to my editor. He said, okay, everything's remote. I mean, I'm published through Flametree, so they're in England. So everything was remote before the pandemic ever hit. And then for short stories, I didn't really notice a drop off, at least in the science fiction and horror areas. So I didn't see that much of an impact at all, except that nobody could go to conventions and, pitch other editors or anything like that.
I was pretty much the same for me. I don't have an agent. I was, because I really couldn't leave the house, I was incredibly productive. And also I write it and then sell it. I mean, I've been invited into a couple of anthologies in last year and this year. So that's essentially a pre-sale, but for the most part, I'll write it and then see what the calls are and go after it. Particularly since I like to literally switch genres from story to story to keep myself fresh. I'm with JG. Scooby-Doo and Hound of the Baskervilles set me on the path for everything is multi-genre. I have a hard time.
Mashup.
Oh my, well, it is basically Scooby is the Hound. It's like the Hound is his sick brother who he needs to help because he's been abused. I have to work hard to keep it purely, genre specific. The Murder Most Fair, there's no weird elements in it because it's based on real life. Same thing, John Shadows is very much just a thriller. But my other books all have, even the Maxi Moxies, which are 80%, Nick and Nora Charles, there's a 20% wackadoodle factor in all of them. A demon, a zombie, something wanders in there somewhere in the story. But it didn't affect me that much, really. I got really good at Zoom. At the time I was teaching an acting class, and we went to radio instead of in-person acting. I got the kids interested in doing radio plays. And so my school started up on Zoom 2 weeks after the lockdown. So I got very well versed in it. And I was teaching art classes and writing classes via Zoom. So that made it easy. I went to a lot of online seminars and agent pitches and classes because everybody else was trying to figure out something to do. So in some ways, I went to more conventions than I would have in the real world because, you know, I could do it in shorts. It made it a lot easier. It didn't affect me. I mean, I imagine if I were up at the next level up, because I'm still at kind of a middling level of Dante's Inferno. If I was at the next level up and the agent had to do a lot of work, and a lot of the agent's work is in person, it really would have been a bottleneck. But, you know, I haven't made it into the big boys yet for Hitchcock or Queen. But the other places I have, you know, I have a lot of repeat sales. Usually I can figure, okay, this sword and sorcery story has got a home, and this mystery story will I have one of my mystery stories is coming out in the Black Beacon book this summer, and I sold it first to mystery. But again, I wrote it and then sold it. I would love to get to the point where, like, here's a 1-sentence description. Sure, here's a contract. And then it would be that, like, he agreed, like, no, God, no, what if I can't come up with the idea?
Yep.
I mean, I have that problem with some of my series because there is a pressure, like the Bob Howard series, there is a pressure to top yourself with the next book. It can be daunting because, you know, you used up your best idea with the first one, or you wouldn't have been able to sell it. Now you got to come up with a better idea. So, you know, and I have not used pandemic in my fiction at all. I don't write that much contemporary stuff. I really like the 30s and 40s. So, and fantasy worlds. So I haven't written a ton of contemporary stuff. Although some of my science fiction stuff that's set in the future now feels somewhat contemporary, sadly. I wrote a series in the late 90s about bioenhanced bounty hunters in the future, but they come about because in that world in 2015, a group of terrorists ran a plane into the World Trade Center. And of course, we did actually shot a television pilot for it. And then 9/11 happened. And I'm like, well, there's that. So in that future universe, the terrorists did it in 2015. We beat my book. That's the problem with writing near science fiction.
Yeah.
Well, that's a concern for any kind of contemporary writing, because I mean the 30s and 40s are a great time to write, to set things, because you're looking at purer mysteries, and nowadays we have CSI'd everything to death. So
yeah, most of it inaccurate anyway, but yeah.
But we've CSI'd everything to death. So, you know, we've got to be really good with the science part of it. It's when you write you had a plane going into the World Trade Center, and then 9/11 happens. Year before last, the third novel in my mystery series was published, 2021, and my series is set in Buffalo. There was a white supremacist attack in Buffalo as a centerpiece of that novel.
Yeah.
And then, you know, a year later, about a year after it was published, if memory serves, it came out in May, and then the following May there was a white supremacy attack on a supermarket in the neighborhood I grew up in.
Yeah.
That's like, you know, you don't want to predict those kinds of things, but
well, I mean, that's the thing, is that all of us are students of human nature and of history. Even if we're writing contemporary stuff, we look at how stuff started. So it's relatively easy to be a futurist in that sense and kind of project a trend to go somewhere. And, Will Murray wrote a novel with S.H.I.E.L.D. With Nick Fury that came out in the early 90s. And it was about the organization Hydra creates a fake airline. And all around the world simultaneously, they crash their planes into major government buildings. And it was one of the books that was put onto the radar of the CIA. And they went, no, no one will do that, and ignored it, which is why no security was instituted.
Yeah, there are those things. I think sometimes, and let me toss this out to you both. Writers, I think sometimes if you want to think of things that could happen, get a staff of writers to sit in a room and pitch ideas or exchange ideas, because they may come up with that.
That's what the government does for war games.
Yeah.
They pull together a bunch of fiction writers and say, okay, here's the scenario. Russia just landed on Pismo Beach. What happens? And that's how they plan their gaming. I mean, Ian Fleming designed operations for MI5 after he was not in the service anymore, because he had the imagination. And because of him, because of Goldfinger, they started equipping cars with caltrop drops and oil pan drops for chases. And they started doing license flips, all from looking at his fiction going, ooh, we can do that.
Hey, for those of us that write, all those things are just writing prompts.
Yeah,
you're right. You're absolutely right.
Hey, what would happen if terrorists attacked New York? Or even better, if you were a terrorist, how would you blow up an airplane or a building?
Yeah. Well, which is why all of us,
we could all come up with dozens of ways.
if we die, clear our browser history first.
Yeah.
5 Days of the Condor, which got shortened to 3 for the movie. Isaac Asimov wrote a story about the creation of the atomic bomb in 1944. And his magazine offices and his home were visited by the FBI, who said, how did you find out about this? Because he had described a process to create it and what it would look like. And he did it based on current scientific papers and just extrapolated. But the FBI doesn't have a lot of imagination, so they were sure he was a Nazi leak, which he said, I'm Isaac Asimov. No, I'm not a Nazi. And after a while he went away. But, it's true, right? We live in a parallel world to everyone else. Even if we're writing contemporary, realistic crime fiction, we live in that world as opposed to the world we live in, where we're in a supermarket and we, send the kids off to school every day and all that. We're in that world of knuckle breakers and what have you, in that other parallel world that we write in. So it's not a hard thing to, it's, what is that? It's Alt Life, the video game where you Sims. It's basically, we live in a Sims in our head all the time,
Very, very true. There are a couple of questions here that have been posted. Nev posted, why did each of you gravitate to your favorite genre, and which authors influenced you the most and why?
I had answered it partly. I'll say growing up, everything I read was dark, whether it was mysteries, thrillers, horror. I just gravitated toward all of that stuff from a very, very young age. My parents tell me that I was watching creature features and James Bond, and Outer Limits, all that stuff before I could, even understand what they were about. As far as who influenced me as a kid, I was probably started with Poe, with Mary Shelley, with Jules Verne. I mean, I loved all of that stuff. And then my dad was a very big reader. He was also an English teacher, and he read all the James Bond books. So that was my first introduction to thrillers and mysteries. And then pretty much anything he had laying around, whatever genre it was, I was reading it. And over time, I kind of dipped away from the science fiction stuff, and it was more thrillers, more horror. And then in the 70s, the late 70s, when Stephen King and Dean Koontz came out, that was it. I was just hooked, but I never wrote a word until I was 40.
Oh, okay.
Didn't think I could do it. I was like, oh, these guys are so good. I can't write like that. So I never tried.
Yeah, well, never self-select. Yes, never self-reject. Yeah, it's true. For me, it's again started with Poe, but Poe and Edgar Rice Burroughs, the Mars books, and then Doc Savage. When Doc Savage came out, when Bantam started reprinting them, and the Conan books came out, I was hooked. Those two parallel paths. I got into the old pulps. Modesty Blaze, the Bond books, the Saint books. I love series because you're comfortable with the characters, but and a lot of Andre Norton. When I was younger, Andre Norton was when I was still reading more science fiction. They still haven't done Beastmaster correctly, and it annoys me. Then from there, then I went on to Dashiell Hammett and Mickey Spillane, and then Parker, absorbed me all. I never really wrote science fiction because my science background is just not strong enough. If anything, it tended toward the space opera-y feel, although I didn't write space opera. I might, it was more social science fiction. I have a short story about a team sniper for the national baseball team. The violence at the games gets so bad that they actually have a team sniper on each team to control the crowd in the stands on the other side. And it's only because I didn't know enough about soccer, or it would have been much more accurate for soccer. Excuse me, football. But yeah, all of that continued to influence me. And I really love reading about, and of course, the Doyle stuff. I love reading about how authors get there. I love reading author biographies and Earl Stanley Gardner and Burroughs. And, and Burroughs was in his mid-30s and had failed at absolutely everything before he finally just said, I can do better than this, and wrote on the back of the stationery from a failed company of his. He wrote the first of his novels longhand and sent it in. For only half of it, in fact. Sent in the half of it, and they said, oh my God, this is great. Where the hell's the rest of it? And that was it. He never looked back. But he was, he'd failed at everything before then. And same thing with Lester Dent. He was bored working, and he's reading something. He said, oh my God, I can do better than that. And started. And I think, everybody, I started going, I want to do my version of this. I want to do my version of that. I've never been into fan fiction, but I really like the idea of taking, well, this concept is cool, but I want to make it my own and go somewhere with it. So yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I write so many genres, because I don't think I read anything that was purely one genre. Because even Poe, he invented the detective story, for God's sakes. Everybody forgets that, he wrote the first detectives, not just, the first, bury people alive stuff that was fun.
The first locked room mystery.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the John Dickinson car stuff, and just, so yeah, all of that's the same. We kind of wandered along the same paths, I think. you know. I probably tended a little more towards swashbuckly stuff, but like Sabatini, I like a lot of Sabatini stuff.
I suspect those paths are well trodden by writers of all types, because what I'm hearing sounds a lot like my own life, and reading everything I could get hold of, and having, my dad was an okay reader, my mother was a voracious reader, and she just left things around and said, hey, you might like this, and so that sort of thing. I think all those influences, all those books, the pulp magazines, comic books, and I think also if you start looking at short stories in so many places, there was a time I read somewhere when they did revisions or updates of Twilight Zone and Hitchcock Presents in the 80s. Somebody said, well, I think it was Ray Bradbury, they asked, why are these shows coming back now? And he said, because the industry apparently has had an attack of common sense, because people love stories. And I think that's a key part to becoming a writer, is falling in love with stories. And I can see that in what you guys are saying. Let's see, I'm looking at some of the other questions here.
No, I wasn't there, and the videotape is lying.
Well, let's open to questions. I think we've addressed the questions that I see. I'm still learning how to navigate hosting duties for this.
I'll ask one.
Thanks, Melly.
Teal, what's the biggest or dumbest mistake crime writers make when they're trying to write fight scenes? What do we get wrong?
Two things. One is the pain. People, somebody wrote once that the problem with violence on television is that there's not enough of it. And that's because in 9 seasons of Mannix, he was shot 17 times and knocked unconscious 67 times. By the 3rd concussion, because if you're knocked unconscious, you have a concussion, he would be speaking funny. By the 5th one, he would not be able to tie his shoes or remember where his keys were. So the ouch factor is usually ignored. People who get stabbed, or like I just saw a Western the other night. Westerns are the worst. They'll get shot with a 45 caliber bullet in the arm. They'll just like wrap a handkerchief around it and go about their business. Like, no, it doesn't happen that way. Your arm is useless, and if it hit the bone, you're unconscious from the pain, the trauma shock. I mean,
my favorite is when you see people get gut shot and they take a couple of antibiotics and they're fine the next day.
Yes. You don't talk about the fact that your hero now wears a colostomy bag.
Right.
And so that's the biggest one, is that they don't address the human toll. They're so used to seeing essentially superheroic heroes like Mannix that, the thing was, like with the Bond books, he was very cagey. He would have Bond get beat up through the book, and at the end, you would think, oh my God, this guy will never function again. And the next book, there would be a throwaway line to, he had some recovery time or something, and then he'll go on. So he acknowledges that he's not being real, but he kind of fools you into like, okay, I know, just go with it, and moves along. Because, again, after Bond in the first book has his nads beaten with a tennis racket
under the chair
for hours, he would literally not be a functional man again, ever. And that's completely not addressed. They kind of forget that. And the other one
he
is
powered through.
Yes, just stomp your foot and keep on going. But the other one is that they make them too complicated. Most people, I always tell people to watch a fight and then just write it. I do a seminar on it, and just write down what happens and then tell it in the simplest way. Because really we only care about how they feel in the fight. Most people are not looking for technique. I always have to be careful that knowing stuff, I can't use terms that are insider terms. I have to really focus on the fact it's the emotion of the fight that matters. Unfortunately, there was a big movement in film to get what they call impressionistic violence, which is the shaky camera. My cameraman has palsy, which was really big in the 90s, and nobody likes. Because on a film, you want to see what's going on. We're not inside the character, we're seeing the fight. But in a book, it's really much more about that. So it's more about how it feels to be hit. I mean, most people, the first time they punch somebody, they're as shocked or more shocked than the purpose they hit, because it sends trauma up your arm. You can break the bones in your hand from punching somebody if you hit them on the skull. I mean, we're really, tree sloths should have won. We are a very fragile species. And unless you spend your time in a Shaolin temple hardening all of your body parts, you're going to be as screwed up as the guy you beat up. When I was a bouncer, we always used to say that the absolute best bouncer technique is bar stool, because no one can block a bar stool. And because anything else, you're going to get hurt. I was real lucky. I talked my way out of most fights. I'm big enough so, when I act like a simp, they think I'm on their side. But most of the time, people, they want to make it either heroic or make it completely unheroic. And, the woman is so fragile that it's only by a fluke that she wins. Which is somewhat true sometimes. But the fact is that no matter how big and muscular you are, you're just as vulnerable as the little frail woman if you're hitting the right place. So if that little woman knows that ballpoint pen going right here will take you out, that's all you need. She doesn't have to break anything or, and a human knee will break under 4.5 pounds of pressure per square inch. That's about the same amount of pressure it takes to crush a Coke can. We are really very poorly made for world dominance. So I'm not quite sure why we are,
Well, let me ask you a question then, and I say this because I'm not just a fiction writer, but a playwright. And so you've done fight choreography for
choreographed fights for about 200 or 300 plays. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's.
I did the Three Musketeers at West Point, which is, if the next war is choreographed, we will win. Those cadets were amazing. You could show it to them once and they had it down. And the guy who was Athos, we always give a big speech before and say, okay, if you forget the choreography or the other guy gets the choreography, what do you do? And the guy who was Athos said, well, do what my character would do. I said, no, you don't do that, because your character would kill him. So, but yes, so sorry, blah.
No, that's, I mean, that's been an issue in theater. We sometimes there are not good fight coordinators, but I was explaining to someone, no, before the play starts, there's a thing called fight call. You go out and you rehearse the steps in the conflict beforehand to make sure nobody gets hurt.
Absolutely, every single time, even if you've done the play for 5 years. In fact, once the play has been up for a while, that's the most dangerous time. People get comfortable and they get sloppy and they miss their mark.
Yes.
So you should, and the thing is, violence on stage is anything. If I push you, if I grab your shirt and yank you across the stage, that should have a fight choreographer. And now, if there usually should be an intimacy coordinator.
Yes.
As well, but I mean, invariably they leave the fights till like almost an afterthought, and often will cast, like I've done 3 Cyranos, and none of the Cyranos had fight training. They cast them for their acting, but they've got a major 1 on 100 fight, and they've got a solo fight. So it's ridiculous to say. That's like saying, I'm going to cast you for this part as a runner because you're a good actor. You don't have any legs? Oh, okay. Well, the choreographer will figure it out. And it's, it's a skill that in England they teach. Over here, it's usually the first thing that acting schools cut.
Wow.
Budget. But it's a very necessary part of the skill.
Well, there's a mistake you should never make, and I made it once. I was in a play, and it was not. There was not a fight per se, but one of the actresses had to slap me, and I looked out before the play that night, and I said, "Oh, my best friend is in the audience. You can really let me have it," and she did.
Jeez.
Then the lights came up at the curtain call, and it wasn't my best friend, just somebody who looked like him in the shadows. I have a horrible true story. Years ago for the Glide Theater, which was the gay theater in New York in the 80s, there was a show called This Isn't Love. And about two roommates who fall in love, and they have various adventures. And at the end of the first act, after they've been lovers, they break up, and the one slaps the other in the face and goes off. And then the second act is that the character who was slapped recalling other parts of their life together. Well, the actor who was slapped was method, which meant he told the other actor, "Go ahead and slap me. I need it for the character." And now I was not on this show. My friend was a stage manager for it and told me this afterwards, and I was horrified. And the actor who was doing the slapping actually hated the other actor. He hated working with him. Now, this show went on for 99 performances. So every night he would haul off and slap him. And as the show went on, that slap got better and better and better. They had to keep an ice pack backstage because the first actor literally on some nights, his face swelled so much he had trouble enunciating his lines. To which Laura Olivier said to Dustin Hoffman once, after Dustin had to be awake for the Marathon Man. So he stayed awake for 3 days and ran around the block. And Olivier looked at him and said, "Yes, Dustin, but where's the acting?" Yeah, I would never, this is the easiest place to screw people up. Dishinged jaws over time, blood vessels, eardrums. I never let, there are people who do contact slaps. I won't, when I choreograph, I never use a contact slap. But yeah, it's amazing what people think they're doing for their art. Or worse, a director will bully someone into saying, "Oh, you're a man, you can take that."
Yeah.
And I'm choreographing a show once where the director said that, where a woman had to slap a guy. And he said, no, don't need that. Well, I want you to hit him. You're a man, you can take it. And I looked at the director and said, "I'll tell you what, every time she hits him for the run of the show, I'm going to hit you. Are you a man?" And so he then let me choreograph the slap. And the actor was very grateful and bought me a pizza after the
Well, we have, Al, you were going to say something?
I was just going to interject one of my pet peeves about on-screen violence, which is gunfights. You know, in an enclosed space, they trade several hundred shots, and then they turn to each other and trade wisecracks as if they would hear anything for a week.
Yes. Yeah, the number of cowboy actors in the 40s who went deaf early in life,
Yeah,
even with half charge bullets outdoors. It's,
yeah.
It destroyed a lot of our soldiers that come back, and they, even with earplugs, their hearing loss is massive.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of it comes down to just there's very little, and you see it in books, but you see it even more in movies and TV shows. There's just no attention to detail. Like, you can't count the number of times you're watching a police procedural or a detective show, and they're walking down a tiled hallway in hard shoes. And you can hear them a mile away as they're trying to sneak up on somebody.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
or pistols that have 38 bullets in them.
Well, yes, that's the magic reloadable gun is the best. Yes. Hopalong Cassidy never had to reload. You know. Yeah, no, the guy I studied took tactical with, he got my pistol certification, he'd been a Marine, and then he became an Army gunnery sergeant, and he trains people. And his biggest peeve is that people in shows treat their guns like props. I have that problem with swords. You see people with a sword that's supposed to be sharp, grabbing the sword by the blade to hand it to someone. You would never do that. Even if it was not sharp, you would be putting oils on the sword, which would cause the sword to rust. And that thing costs a full year's salary for a peasant. You know, you wouldn't do that. It was a Cadillac you're handing off. So, yeah, the fact is, and that's why cops shoot themselves. They get too comfortable with their own guns and they start to believe the TV stuff. You know, it's a Cobra. You have to be.
Well, yeah, you got to hold it like this.
Oh God! Boom, boom, boom. Yes, because they're made to eject the shells up and to the left because 99% of people are right-handed. So if you do that, it actually puts the shell into your groin. If you do this, it puts the shell into your face. And in the 80s, when guys were coming back from Vietnam, and after the John Woo movies come out, they were starting to do the guns this way. The cops used to be able to find guys when they went into the projects because they'd have casing burns on their face from when they got hit with the hot brass.
Yep.
It's like,
well, and that's what's great about some of the movies is you see them when they're doing that. There are no shells coming out.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's that perfect gun. It just, all of it just is ejected at once.
Yes. Yes. No, it's like bakers don't like to see you cook. You know, don't like to see you bake. I try to watch stuff with my fan mind separate from my, you know, it's like how many books have been ruined for us. We have to make ourselves read them as just viewers, not as writers, or we can't get into them.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder every year to separate that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I come from a biology background. So in college, I took a lot of field biology courses, so reptiles, mammals, that kind of stuff. And when I see books or movies where, a snake is screaming or, yowling at something, or just animals that just do things that are physically impossible for them to do in nature, I just have to say, 30 seconds on Google when you could fix this.
Yes. Well, and
that's just getting lazy.
Well, that's the thing is maybe 30 years ago, a writer could be forgiven for a little breach of something because they couldn't get to the library for some obscure fact. But nobody has that excuse anymore.
That's right.
If you have Google Foo, you are the Colossus the Foreman Project. You know everything. So you shouldn't get anything wrong, from street layouts to, there's a great Mickey Spillane story that he had a bet with one of his editors that he could put a mistake in a book that none of the proofreaders could find. He said it won't affect the plot, but it'll be something you can't find. And the proofreaders, this is in the 60s, of course, and the editor took the bet. And he put it in, it made it all the way into print, and they started getting letters from people. He put the toll booths for the George Washington Bridge on the other side. But none of the proofreaders drove cars. So none of them left Manhattan. So they didn't get, but at that, after all of the complaints come in, Spillane said, I will never do that to my clients again. Because he called his readers his clients. He says, I won't do that to them. I won't get it wrong again ever, because I don't want to piss them off. But You know, now it would take 2 seconds to Google that. And
But-
you would know.
Here's the
Thank you.
question.
Thank you both for that. I just, before we wrap up, I just want to add my favorite gaffe, because I saw it somewhere recently and it wasn't an old movie. I think, don't they know better by now? The silencer on the revolver.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes. Oh, well, that's the myth that will continue forever because it's convenient for them. You know, it's convenient for them. That's why a lot of the other myths, even spaceships making noise,
Burning in
it's
space.
convenient, you know. You know, it doesn't make noise in space. Yes, sir. How?
This goes back years. Piggy in Lord of the Flies has to be nearsighted for his character's sensibility to work. But nearsighted lenses do not start fires. It's only hyperoptic, farsighted lenses, which are magnifying glasses, that can do that. You know, Kafka Metamorphosis, the first half requires that the door open in, the second half requires that the bedroom door open out.
Yes.
You know, it's stuff like this. You know, anybody can lose themselves in that. But I really appreciate, Teal, especially your expertise with fights. I too have often wondered, doesn't that hurt?
The short answer is always yes.
Yes.
The short answer, always yes, it does. So JG, are you going to StokerCon?
Yes, I will be there this year.
As indeed will I.
Do it. I know it's been so long. Well, the last thing that I was at was the last StokerCon. So I haven't been to a single thing since then.
I've only been to like 2 cons since then, but yeah, it takes a lot of getting used to being in a room with that many people. You know, there really is a psychological holdover, and even today, I still wear my mask everywhere. Mostly because that way I can hold up bodegas easier. But
well, you know, in New York now, you're not going to be able to.
No, I'll be able to wear it. I just
not inside a retail store.
You can wear the mask. It's not illegal to wear the mask.
No, but Adams just said that no more masks in retail stores by customers because of too many robberies.
Oh, I haven't heard that one yet.
Oh,
Well, I ain't going to be doing any retail today. I ain't going to be doing any retail.
Well, everybody will have to wear a clear mask.
There you go.
So he can't hide his face. Thank you both for this delightful evening.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to get to talk to some people and see folk.
Yes.
I love the fact that MWA is getting back to all this, guys. Really, thank you. Between this and the newsletter, it's nice to feel connected again.
And we're also pushing, and Russ Colchimiro and I are playing around with ideas for this, for the PDF we've talked about, where the members in the New York chapter will get a page where they can promote their work, what have you. We're going to try to set up a template that'll work for everybody with a little variation, but everybody gets a page. We put together a PDF and we distribute it to libraries all over the country, in the hope that library purchases will take the place. I mean, Les Roberts is a Cleveland mystery writer. I don't know if any of you know Les, but he used to write for television and so forth. And he published a really cool mystery called Full Cleveland through St. Martin's the same year they published Silence of the Lambs. So guess who got the advertising money? It wasn't Les. And so I think we can try to do things like this PDF that'll put our lesser selling writers somewhere out there in the ether to increase sales, and that's kind of the idea behind that. So there'll be more about that later.
Awesome.
As long as I've got you all here, and I'm telling this to all my writer friends, I don't know if you've seen the ads anywhere online or anything like that for these cards that are called DOT.
Okay.
It's got a code on the back and it's got a chip built inside of it. And you sign up online, it's $20 a card. And what you do is you fill out a profile online that's got your website, the name of your organization, all this other stuff, all your social media. And then they send you the card. You tap the card on your phone to activate it. And then when you're at cons, if someone wants your information, just tap on their phone and all of your contact info and website info goes into their phone contacts automatically.
Oh,
Wow. Wow.
thank you. That sounds
So
like a great
no more
idea.
having to carry all those business cards with you.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Thank
Wow.
you.
Yeah, I just started using it a week ago and it works great. Any kind of phone.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Next month, we will have Crime Con. I made a note here, historical crime. If you want to start thinking about that, some people write historical crime. I know Nev was here earlier and she does. So we'll kick around ideas for that next month.
Groovy.
Okay.
So
Good night, all.
thank you all and have a pleasant evening. And look at that, my alarm is ringing. It's time for my medicine.
This was medicine for me.
Oh,
All right, take care,
well,
one and all.
getting old, you know.
Good night.
Take care,
Thank you.
folks.
Nice meeting everybody.
Nice
Thank you,
having you.
Bill.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Why didn't you mute?